Joining us. Thank you to Menachem Nussbaum.
I have recruited somebody for tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Menachem Nussbaum, for the material he sent. Menachem sent me some great stuff. So Menachem actually informed me about this reality that a lot of the land in Israel is actually, when you buy a piece of land, is actually leasing the land, and he told me that was something.
The bulk of it, that's Eretz Yisrael proper.
Yeah.
Karen
Kayamet, that's right. So you can get solve the problem.
It's a small part, and various other groups own a small part.
A small part. So it doesn't solve the problem. Ruba is the Karen Kayamet. But and then he told me that the Shuva of the Satmar Rebbe was very against the Heter Mechira. Shlomo Zalman, I think, probably broke ranks from the Haredi poskim in the modern era in support of the Heter Mechira. I saw in one of the journals that Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was quoted as saying that not to rely on the Heter Mechira is just a hidur, which means that Shlomo Zalman Auerbach held that essentially the Heter Mechira is a valid heter.
He was able to get back to overcome the objection of all the underlying,
that's
like
right.
whether you can sell the land, whether you can
That's
sell
right.
the land, you even remove the heter kedusha shvius.
Correct. All those issues. He wrote his Madane Eretz, this is work on Zraim. In Madane Eretz, on Shvius, the first 23 simanim, or almost the whole sefer, is just on Heter Mechira. So he got a haskama from Rav Isra Zalman Meltzer, was the Rosh Hashiva of Eitz Chaim, and Rav Isra Zalman Meltzer gave a partial haskama. Rav Isra Zalman Meltzer said, your gun and whatever you wrote is amazing, but I can't give you a full haskama because the Heter Mechira is so controversial, or however he wrote it, okay? And he said, it's not something that I ever learned properly. He wrote very humbly. Rav Isra Zalman Meltzer wrote humbly. He says, Heter Mechira is not a sugya that I learned through properly, so therefore I'm not going to...
Even for those that hold that Heter Mechira is not suitable,
right?
If you actually buy fruits and vegetables that are under Heter Mechira, you can still impose the restrictions of kedusha shvius.
Right. In other words,
you have no issue to eat it.
There's no issue to eat fruit. If, let's say, you belong to the school of the Chazon Ish, the Satmar Rebbe, and a lot of Haredi poskim, the Ashi, that completely reject the Heter Mechira. So even if somebody offers you an apple, right, and says, eat the apple. So there's no issue to eat it b'kedusha shvius. There is a machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. If somebody did schara with fruits of shvius, does that now forbid the fruit? It's a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi seems to say there's no issue. Vinutam says there is an issue. But personally, I'm not so strict. I'm not sure if for example, I was in somebody's house and my wife asked me, could we eat these fruits? The Heter Mechira says, if they're fruits, you can certainly eat them. If they're vegetables, then it's already, you have to rely on the Heter Mechira, because if you don't have the Heter Mechira, that would mean that the vegetables are svichim, after growth, and you're not allowed to eat after growths in the shvius unless you rely on the Heter Mechira. Okay? So basically, just the first thing that usually comes, or often comes to people's minds about the Heter Mechira is Mechiras Chametz. Selling the chametz on before Pesach. Excuse me. So the idea of selling the chametz to a guy, to a non-Jew, to circumvent the Isser, is already Toseftim, Sachem, Perek Beis.
But they're really very different, aren't they?
Yes.
The underlying mechanism is totally different.
They're very different. Exactly. So we're going to look at some of the differences. This is technically the first year on Heter Mechira. The last year was about the Isser, about the prohibition of selling land to non-Jews. That is a surmountable. You can get around that problem. According to Chazon Ish, you can, and for the Chazon Ish, that's a shlich l'dvar geira. The agent of the farmers to sell the land the agents are executing an avera, and that therefore makes the whole appointment of the agent null and void. That was the Chazon Ish's opinion. But if you recall last week, we said that one heter why you don't have a problem of leitichanem is because you can sell it to a noachite, and leitichanem, the strong mashmos, the strong indication of the Rambam is that the problem of giving non-Jews a foothold applies exclusively to Avdei Avodah Zarah, idol worshippers, or people that are under the category of minim, right, heretics. In other words, the the religion of Islam is heretical according to Judaism because it rejects the authenticity, the divine origins of the Torah Shabbat, the oral Torah. I think they reject the Torah Shabbat too. And the Christians don't reject the Torah Shabbat. I think the Muslims reject the Torah Shabbat too. So therefore, I made the argument last week that you wouldn't be able to sell. There would be a problem of leitichanim to sell the land to a Muslim, but a Noachai there wouldn't be any issue. So that would solve the problem. Also, according to the Kafter V'Ferach said that if you have a personal interest, if you want to stand to gain, it's not just because you want to be friendly or buddy or to assimilate, even if you don't want to completely assimilate, but you're not interested in even assimilating to any degree whatsoever, you just have a personal interest involved according to the Kafter V'Ferach, that would be okay. And that's why we said the Kafter V'Ferach was matter to sell, he says if you have a house in a Gentile city and it's impossible to live there, he says you'd be allowed to sell the apartment. So you have two haterim that help us get around, that could help us get over the problem of leitichanim. Okay? Now, the idea of selling, I just mentioned the Tosefta. The Tosefta talks about mechiras chametz, selling it to chametz. It talks about Yisrael v'goy sheibayim nesfina. You have a Jew and a non-Jew that were on a ship. Chametz be'ad Yisrael, and the Jew has chametz. So he's a machal enach. He could sell it to the non-Jew. B'neisin matano, and you can give it as a gift. And you can even buy it back from after Pesach. He has to have full intention that he's giving it as a gift. So why does the Tosefta emphasize he has to actually what was the need for that emphasis? Because I think the Tosefta appreciated that some people might not really have Gemiras Das. Gemiras Das means to say that there's real intention to give it away as a gift. There's real intention to sell it. Therefore, it's not just a subterfuge or an artifice.
At the time of the gift, they accepted.
Yeah, exactly. They accepted the possibility. And I know that in Baltimore, Rabbi Heinemann, Rabbi Moshe Heinemann, sure. He's the rabbinic authority in Baltimore. He's makpid that every Pesach, the guy to whom the chametz is sold should actually go to at least a few households at some point on Pesach and take some chametz. Right? Because he wants that to be done so that people, when they sell the chametz, are aware that it's a real sale, and therefore they have having the awareness that the goy could come sometime on Pesach and take the chametz from you. That awareness is enough to help you understand and help you appreciate that you actually are selling the chametz. I remember when I was listening to the radio on Erev Pesach one year, so they found an Arab in Abu Ghosh to sell the chametz to. So after the sale, this was the official sale that was executed by the state of Israel, by the chief rabbis. So the Arab, he got up and he said, Be'ezrat Hashem, next year Mashiach will come and you won't need to sell the chametz. Okay? So I'm not sure if he really appreciated what Mechiras Chametz is about or not, okay? Okay, so that's the idea. So therefore, you see that the Tosefta had to emphasize the Bovat Shitim Matana Gemura. I suspect it's because the Tosefta appreciated that people might make a sale, but they lack Gemiras Das. They lack real intention to sell the land, okay? Now, what about in general, right? Could you use a subterfuge to bypass a mitzvah, to circumvent a mitzvah, to find a loophole just to avoid doing a mitzvah, or to avoid a prohibition of the Chachamim? So that's already Gemara in Shabbos, Taf Kuf Lametet. The Gemara brings a story there. So the Rabbanon were very upset about a certain scholar, and they came to complain to Rav Ashi, and they said, Chazi Mahar Tzumir the Rabbanon, Rav Huna ben Rav Chiyun Shmei. Some say his name was Rav Huna B'Revi Chalvan Shmei. Now, the Chacham made a prohibition. The Chacham didn't want you to plug the faucet of a barrel using a piece of garlic. So what they used to do is to plug the faucet. So the Gemara says it's too similar to fixing a barrel. If your barrel is broken, you might take some plaster and you might fix the barrel on Shabbos. That's an Isur D'Oraisa. It's Metakin Mana. The Chacham said even putting a piece of garlic in a hole or in a faucet is reminiscent. It's similar to fixing a barrel. So the Chacham didn't want you to do that. Okay? A lot of things the Chacham forbade because even, for example, immersing vessels in a mikvah on Shabbos. It's too similar to being metakin. It's too similar to fixing. So anything that's remotely similar to fixing, the Chacham forbade on Shabbos. So what was this rabbi doing? The shakal bar de tuma, he took a piece of garlic, and he put it in the faucet of the barrel. V'amar, and he said, I'm not fixing the barrel. I just need somewhere to put my garlic. I have nowhere to put my garlic, so I just need to put it in there. So that's called haram. It's a subterfuge. Right? It's using a legal loophole. In other words, who can prove him wrong? Who can prove to him what his intention is? Who can prove what his intention is? Is he intending to fix the barrel? Is he intending to plug the hole of the barrel? Or is he just trying to find somewhere to store his piece of garlic?
His mashal is what counts, isn't it? If
that's right.
He's just doing it because it's a way to fix the barrel.
Right. So the truth is, it could be because his official cover story is that he's just doing it to store his piece of garlic, so that's his official cover story, so that maybe that should be enough to negate the prohibition of the Chachamim. Okay, because I was really thinking about this a lot, Yisachar, the point that you raised, and I'm really not sure about it. I was thinking, what does that mean? What's called haram? Haram is a subject. I saw there's two translations. I wanted to see how I saw that the art school translate harama as subterfuge. The Sefaria, which was, I think, the translation based on the Steinsaltz, the Sefaria app, I'm sure you've probably heard of it's an excellent app. It's amazing what the Sefaria managed to do. So they translate as an artifice. I prefer the translation of the art scroll. I usually prefer the translation of the Sefaria. They're usually better, but in this case, I prefer the translation of the art scroll because an artifice means something false. So that's why I'm not sure if it's really false. Is he lying? Is he outright lying? In other words, he really intends just to clog the hole in the barrel, and what he's saying is just a cover story. He's just lying. Is that what it means? Or no? Or maybe he has two intentions. Maybe he intends to store maybe he's also intending to fix the barrel, and he's also intending to find a place to store his garlic.
He just thinks it's a clever workaround.
A clever workaround, that whatever it is, it's a subterfuge. I mean, you say a loophole, however you want to call it, okay? So the Gemara says, harama b'drabanan is mutter. If it's if you use this harama, which is a subterfuge to bypass a rabbinic prohibition, then it's okay. You can't use harama to bypass a doraisa prohibition, but you can use it to bypass a rabbinic prohibition. The Gemara brings another story. The Chacham also forbade people to cross a river on a boat. If you come to swim, then you're also going to make a barrel. Like they used to use barrels as life rafts or lifeboat, whatever. So you might come to construct something, just like music. We don't play music on Shabbos because you might come to construct an instrument. Okay? So he said, I'm just going to sleep. I need a place to nap. And he says there's a raft, right? He took a pillow and he took a nap on the raft, and he knew that the Nandra was going to take the raft across the river. And he said, I didn't intend to ride a boat or ride a raft on Shabbos. I just intended to find a good place to find a nap. So the Gemara says, again, it's only in Is Darbanan, Harama Darbanan. Now the Gemara does finish and say, Tsuvim Darbanan lesson. The Gemara says it's only allowed for Talmud Chacham. Okay, because the Talmud Chacham is not going to stretch this heter. He's not going to abuse the heter. The Rambam doesn't bring the din of Tsuvim Darbanan. According to the Rambam, it's only according to the way the Magen Mishnah explains the Rambam, that you don't even need a Talmud Chacham. You need a Talmud Chacham for the case of crossing the river, because that's a more problematic issue. I'm not sure why, but with the issue of putting the garlic in the barrel, it doesn't even need to be a Talmud Chacham according to the Rambam. According to Shulchan, it doesn't need to be a Talmud Chacham. So I just brought this as a little bit of precedent to show that if we're dealing with a rabbinic prohibition, you don't have to worry about using a loophole or a subterfuge.
With the barrel, you only have hefsed meruba. It could be.
It's hefsed meruba. Well, Shemitah is definitely hefsed meruba. There's no greater meruba than
You'll say that. Undertoning chametz on Pesach is the raita.
Is the raita, exactly. So why are they doing it?
And Heter Mechira is
the Rabbanan, exactly.
And is that the point you're going to get to?
Right. So the thing is that there's a minhag, very good point. First of all, the first problem is, I'm not sure, I see that they always bring this Gemara in the context of Heter Mechira. I'm not sure if I should have even brought this Gemara in the context of Heter Mechira. I'll tell you why. Because, as you point out, first of all, you might need to have a Talmud Chacham. According to the Shulchan Aruch, you can only use a harama, subterfuge, if it's a Talmud Chacham. Here the farmers are selling the land. Okay, the execution of the sale is actually being carried out by the agents of the farmers, which are Talmid Chacham. How do you look at that? So that's why I'm not sure. Maybe we'll look at that at the next year. And the other, I'm not sure if it's actually a real sale. It's not a subterfuge. And the proof is, as you mentioned, that we sell the chametz, which is potentially an Issur D'Oraisa. Why don't we say harama? The answer is, if it's a real sale, it's not a subterfuge. If it has to be a real, genuine sale where the person really intends to sell the chametz, So therefore, I'm not sure. But today, before we get into these issues, today the topic of the shir will be a more important introduction to Heter Mechira, and that is Shvius today, the observance of Shemitah in today's day of age. Is it Doraita? Are we obligated on a Torah level? That's one possibility. There are some Rishonim that maintain that way. The second school of Rishonim maintain it's rabbinic. That's the halacha, according to most poskim, that today the observance of Shemitah is a rabbinic obligation. And then the third school of Rishonim, and we'll see, hopefully we'll get to that today, is that it's only midat chasidut, that you don't even have to observe the Shemitah on a rabbinic level. It's a pious act to observe Shemitah. That's all it is. Midat chasidut, that's it. Nothing more. So let me repeat myself. Hopefully we'll get through today. So a lot of Marmakaimis, we'll see the three schools of Rishonim. Either the observance of Shemitah today is Doraita, or the second school is Darabbanan, which is the Halacha, and then the third school of Rishonim is that it's Amidat Chasidut. Now it's important that we learn this third school of Rishonim that hold that it's only a pious act to observe Shemitah because we can use it as a tziruf. Okay? What does that mean? If there are other factors that help us permit it, then we can use that school of Rishonim as a backup, if you like. So we have a school of Rishonim that maintain that we're not even obligated to observe Shemitah. Granted, that's not the halacha, but we can use them as a backup, what we call okay. So let's see the Gemara, and let's see how it all starts. First of all, the question, part one of the Shir, what about Yovel? Yovel, the Jubilee, okay? Every 50th year, all the slaves are freed. It's actually another year of Shemitah, which is extremely difficult. That means they would have to observe 2 consecutive years where they would refrain from agricultural work, which was, I'm sure, very difficult for them. But that's the idea of Yovel. So the Gemara in Erechin, let's just read the bold section. I put the Gemara in its entire context so you can look at it again at home, but I can't go through the entire Gemara. But let's just see the bold section. Tanya Mishagalu Shevet Reuven Shevet Gad, Chatzi Shevet Menashe. The first exile occurred to the tribes that were living on the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, they were exiled quite a few decades before the exile of the Beit Rishon happened in stages. So the first stage was when Sencheriv came and exiled Reuven, Gad, and half of Shevet Menashe that lived on the other side of the Jordan River. So therefore, at that point, Batul Yovel, the observance of Yovel discontinued, Shenemar, v'karasim dror ba'aretz l'chol yashveh. You should call it a dror. How do you translate dror? A calling of freedom. There's probably a better word for it. Bizman shekal yashveh level is man shekal mitzasa. Yovel is only observed when you could fulfill the reality that's described in the Torah l'chol yashveh, for all those that settle. So if the Jewish people are not all settled in the land, there's no observance of Shemitah. You don't even...
We don't usually say all. We say the group, the road.
We say Rabbi, but I guess there's an emphasis l'chol yashveh. So even though only a minority of the people were exiled, right, that was enough to discontinue the observance of Yovel because it says l'chol yashveh. And neither that the Gemara says it's not even good enough for everybody to be there. If all the tribes are mixed up today, right, I might be from the tribe of Yehuda, you may be from the tribe of Binyamin, I don't know. Everybody could belong to a different tribe, but nobody is settled in their tribal territory. So the Gemara says that the only time Yovel is observed is when Binyamin is in the territory of Binyamin, Yehuda is in the territory of Binyamin, so which means to say we are settling the land in the orderly fashion that the Torah had intended for. Okay? So if you don't fulfill those requirements, there's no observance of Yovel because the Torah says for all the inhabitants. Okay? So that's already stage one, right? Stage one is that certainly today Yovel is not observed, for sure not on a Doraisa level. So Amar of Nachum Bar Yitzchak, now this is a very important point, the bottom line of number 3 in your reference sheet, Monu Yovelis Lakad Shmitin, they still counted the Yovel, they still kept track when the Jubilee year was, because it's important in order to find out and know when the Shemitah year is. Okay, we have a Machlokes Tanoim, if the Jubilee year counts as the first of the coming 7-year cycle, or only the year after the Yovel counts as the first of the 7-year cycle that follows. We rule that we don't count Yovel, so therefore we have the year of Yovel, only the year after Yovel, so we begin another 7-year cycle. Okay, so the year after Yovel is the first of the 7-year cycle. So it says even after the Yovel was discontinued, they still had to know when Yovel was, right? Because they couldn't count the year of Yovel as the first year of the Shemitah cycle. Okay? Now, I know what you're going to ask, Michael. Tell me if I'm wrong. Today, we don't know when the Yovel is, so how do we know when Shemitah is? So the Rambam, according to the Rambam, indeed, the Rambam says that he personally maintains that in today's day of age, right, since we don't know when the Yovel is, we don't know when Shemitah is. According to the Rambam, you'd have to know when the Yovel is in order.
You have 8 years.
Exactly. So the whole cheshbon gets off track. Okay. However, the Rambam, number 7 in the reference sheet. Okay, first of all, the Rambam in number 7 in the reference sheet, Rashi, the Rambam codifies the halacha of the Gemara that when the Shevet Reuven and Gad and Menashe were exiled, they discontinued the observance of Yovel. Okay. Number 8 in the reference sheet, the Rambam in Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel Perek Yud also points out, even though they didn't observe Yovel during the Second Temple period, because we didn't have all the Jewish people settled in the land during the Second Temple period. However, they still counted the year of the Yovel Kadosh Shmitas. So the Rambam maintains that in today's day and age, that was the Rambam's personal opinion, we have no idea when Shemitah is. However, says the Rambam, number 9 in your reference sheet, however, quotes the opinion of the Gaonim. They have a tradition in their hands. Ish mipi ish lemanu ba'osin shivim shana shebin churban ba'is rishon u'ba'in ba'is sheni. After the destruction of the first temple, until the second temple was rebuilt, and after the destruction of the second temple, then the count changed. The system of counting changed, and after the destruction of the temple, or during the 70 years of Galus Bavel, during those years, right, we no longer count Yovel at all. So according to the Gaonim, there are 3 different types of realities, 3 different time periods. One time period is when all the people are settled in the land, where we count the Yovel, we count the Shemitah, and we observe the Yovel and the Shemitah. That's one reality. The second reality is when the Beis HaMikdash is built, but we don't have the majority of the people the people settled in the land. That means we're counting the Yovel, but we're not observing the Yovel. According to the Gaonim, there's a third stage, and that's where we're at now, where we don't even count the Yovel at all. And how do we know that? Misari Siviyadim. They have a tradition, Ishmi Piish, that's the way it works. Okay?
If you take the time period from after the second Churban Sheni and divide by 7, the number of years, you know.
You know when Yovel is, exactly.
When Shemitah is.
When Shemitah is, you know when Yovel is, exactly. So that's what we learn. Right? The Gemara in Tainis Daf Chavtes tells us that the year of the destruction of the second temple was the year after Shemitah, which means it was the first year in the Shemitah cycle. So therefore, by using simple mathematics, as long as you know when the destruction of the second temple is, you divide it by 7, and then you know when the Shemitah year is. Okay? But according to the Rambam's personal opinion, we don't know when the Shemitah is. If you know when the Yovel is, not if you know when the Shemitah is.
We factored out Yovel, so
right.
Dividing by 7 doesn't.
Dividing by 7 is easy.
But really, does it actually matter if we know the exact year of Shemitah? Right, at least in the Torah, it says every 7th year you have Shemitah. It doesn't say it has to be every 7th year counting from a specific time.
Right, I guess that's theoretical. It was a given to the Chachamim that the Chachamim wanted us to count Shemitah from the time that we entered Eretz Yisrael. We counted 7 years, and therefore the count of 7 began at which point we entered.
If we're counting at the wrong time, it sounds like you're still maybe fulfilling the mitzvah anyway.
Perhaps, maybe even if we're keeping the wrong year Shemitah, we're still keeping the mitzvah. Okay.
It's like if you're someplace where you don't know
when you forget what Shabbat is.
When you're Shabbos, exactly. Gemara and Shabbos, the beginning of Kal Gadol. You still separate it.
It has enormous implications.
Yeah, because it frees all the slaves.
Right. And all the land.
And all the land. Everybody receives their ancestral homeland, their ancestral plot back.
It must be living in
Exactly. Now, if you looked at this Gemara, first of all, I'm going to jump back a little bit, jump back to number 4 in the reference. Rashi says, "Al shmitin hayinayim l'shamit ksafim v'l'shamit mizra v'katzos." Gemara says, okay, so remember we had the stage during the Bayit Sheni period. They weren't observing Yovel, but they were still counting Yovel because during the Bayit Sheni period they had to know when Yovel is in order to know when Shemitah is. Okay, that was during the second period, the second temple period. So Rashi says, so why did they need to know when Shemitah is? If they were not observing Yovel, why do you have to observe Shemitah? So Rashi says they needed to count the Yovel to know when Shemitah is. Why? Because Hayunoi Hagim. What does it mean Hayunoi Hagim? look at the bold section, number 4 of your reference sheet, they accustomed themselves, they had the custom to observe Shvius. So Rashi clearly indicates that during the Bayit Sheni period, even the observance of Shemitah was only rabbinic. It was only a rabbinic obligation to observe Shemitah.
Sounds like even less than rabbinic.
Noihagim, exactly. Correct? So if you look at the Talmud Yerushalmi, this is a very important Yerushalmi, number 5 on the reference sheet, says the Yerushalmi, Zed Dvar HaShemitah Shemai. The Torah uses a redundant language. This is the matter of Shemitah Shmai. So there's a redundant language. If the name of the year is Shemitah, you don't have to say Shmait, that you have to undo. Shemitah means to undo. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Omer Shnei Shmitin, Shemitah ve'Yavul. The Torah is referencing or alluding to 2 Shemitas. One is Shemitah and one is Yovel. Because Yovel is also Shemitah, because again, you have to refrain from agricultural work even during the year of Yovel. V'shasha Yovel Noiheg, says the Yerushalmi, when the Yovel is observed, Hashmita Noheges Midivah, that is when Shvius is observed on the Torah level. So which means to say the Yerushalmi is making Shemitah and Yovel mutually inclusive. The Torah says Dvar Shemitah Shmait. The Torah is making them interdependent. When you have Shemitah observed on the Torah level, when you have Yovel observed on the Torah level, you also have Shemitah observed on the Torah level. If you're not observing Yovel, then you're not observing Shemitah either. Follow that? And that's what Rashi says, that even during the Bayit Sheni period, they were only counting the Yovel year so that they could observe Shemitah on a rabbinic level. Other Rishonim don't accept it. The Rishonim that maintain that Shemitah is on a Deraisa level, they understand the Gemara today. If they were counting the Yovel, in order to know when Shemitah is, they understood that means Shemitah is Deraisa. Okay? Yeah.
It's like Russia.
Yeah, sure.
During the Yovel year,
yeah.
Do all of the Shemitah laws apply exactly the same during Yovel?
Yeah, all the Shemitah laws apply equally during the Yovel year. Yeah.
Because you should Yovel.
Correct, exactly. Whatever agricultural halachas will apply during the Shemitah will apply exactly that way during the Yovel year. Okay? So the Talmud Yerushalmi is the source that makes Shemitah and Yovel interdependent, and therefore if Yovel is not being observed on a Deraisa level, then Shemitah is only D'Rabbanan. Okay? That's the way number 6 on the reference you point out. Rashi says Noigin, but Taisus in Erich and Daf Lamed Beis already points out that Rashi in Gittin, right, says that they observe Shemitah on a rabbinic level. Okay, so let's move into number part 2 of the Shir. So this is just a bit of a repetition about these sources twice. Dvarim, Perek Tezvav, Pasuk Beis, Parshas Bahar, Zed Dvar Shemitah Shemoid, again that redundant language. So the Yerushalmi in 2 different places, the Yerushalmi in Shvius, Perek Yud Halacha Beis, number 11 on your reference sheet, number 12 on your reference sheet, the Yerushalmi in Gittin, Perek Dal Halacha Gimel. Again, this is where the Yerushalmi says that if you're not observing the Yovel, you don't either observe the Shemitah on a Deraisa level. Now, number 13 on the reference sheet, the Gemara in Moed Katan Daf Beis. The Gemara says that you're allowed to water the fields in Shvius. So the Gemara says, Beis HaShlachin. Shlachin is a field that needs rainwater. Certain fields don't need rainwater or don't need extra rainwater to survive. They have enough. They have a spring there, so therefore they could survive without rainwater. But the Beis HaShlachin is Shadhi. Shadhi means a tired. The field is tired. The field needs rainwater. So you're allowed to water such a field in the year of Shemitah. Says the Gemara, how could you water a field in the year of Shemitah? So Bai says, Shvius Bezman Hazeh D'Rabbanan. Shvius today is only rabbinic, and therefore the rabbis apply leniencies. Remember, if the rabbis make a stringency, they have the prerogative to apply leniencies, correct? So therefore, since it's a field that really needs water, and if you don't water the field, you could stand to incur a great loss. Therefore, the Chacham allowed you to water the field in the year of Shvius. So this is an important Gemara because it shows that Shemitah is rabbinic not just for the cancellation of loans. At the end of the Shemitah year, we cancel all loans. It's because there were some Rishonim that wanted to argue that Shemitah is D'Rabbanan only for the cancellation of loans. Because when the pasuk says Zed Dvar Shemitah Shemoid, the pasuk was talking about the cancellation of loans. Number 10 in reference, Zed Dvar Shemitah Shemoid Kol B'Hal Mashayada. If somebody owes you money, then you cancel the loan. Okay, so some Rishonim wanted to say yes, the Yerushalmi linked Shemitah with Yovel, and if Yovel is not observed, then Shemitah is not either observed. But that's only for the cancellation of loans. But you see from the Gemara in Moed Katan Beis that when we say Shemitah is rabbinic, it's for the cancellation. That means the cancellation of loans are rabbinic, and also the obligation to refrain from agricultural work is also rabbinic, and that is why, according to Abaye, they permitted people to water their fields in the year of Shvi'at. Okay, so that's a very important halacha. Yes, that's the Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara in Gittin Lamed Vav. The Gemara asks the question, Prusbul. What's Prusbul? Prusbul is also a loophole. It's also a way of bypassing the cancellation of laws. It was necessary. Exactly. So very good. So number 16 on the reference sheet. Right? The Gemara, I'm jumping a little bit. My apologies. So the Gemara Gittin Daf Lamed Vav. The Gemara says Hillel enacted the Prusbul. Hillel said that what you basically do is you take all your loans and you hand your loans over to the court. And therefore, there is no cancellation of loans that belong to the court. Okay? If it's in the hands of... Someone says, how could you do that? The Torah commands you to cancel the loans, and then you find a loophole to completely uproot a mitzvah in the Torah. So the Gemara says you can do it because Shemitah is D'Rabbanan. Okay?
I go to my bank and say, cancel my mortgage.
That's right. I wonder, does the bank do a prusbul? They probably do a prusbul. Yeah. So we had a
good luck trying not to pay your mortgage.
Right. So what happens is, somebody came to me with the following shayla, a friend of mine. He came to me and he said they had the following shayla. There's about tshuva. He became religious, and he, for the first time in his life, he learned about the cancellation of loans. So he said, for the last 40 years of my life, I've been giving loans to people, and I've extracted my loans. And according to what I'm learning now, I didn't write a prusbul. I wasn't religious. I didn't write a prusbul. So do I have to give these loans back? That was the question. So I thought to be mad with such a thing called Takonas Hashavim. The Gemara brings a story where somebody wanted to do tshuva, but he stole a lot. So his wife said, you're silly, because if you want to do tshuva, even the belt on your waist is not yours, you're going to have to give it back. You'll be left penniless. So he said, you're right, I give up on doing tshuva. So Chachamim said, if this caused somebody not to do tshuva, that's so bad, Chachamim Takonas Hashavim. But if somebody does tshuva, right, under certain, they're not okay. Very generally, there are many circumstances where he's allowed to avoid giving back what he owns. Okay, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, because I wanted to say because of Takan Shav, maybe he doesn't need to give it back.
The truth is, not all of those loans would become due after a Shemitah.
Right, it could be, yeah, Nechanam. If he gave the loan in the first year, the Shemitah had been extracted in the third year, but he says he definitely, some of the loans, well, the loans, the cancellation of loans happen at the end of the Shemitah year, so therefore if he gave the loan before the conclusion of the Shemitah year, and then he extracted after the conclusion of the Shemitah year, then he'd be... So the question is, I think, Gzeila. If you already took it back, is it called Gzeila? Is it called stealing, or is it just failure to fulfill the mitzvah?
You can figure out which loans
violate Shemitah.
He gave a lot of them.
He gave a lot of them, but I'm sure he can do both. I'm sure if he has a good bookkeeper, he would... That's right. It's a machlokes achrayim.
If it's not considered stealing, he doesn't have to give it back. That's
right. So it's a machlokes achrayim. If you did take back your loan, you didn't cancel, you took it back, it's not called theft. Some achrayim say it's not called theft. You failed the mitzvah of canceling your loans, but it's not called theft.
It's not theft.
That's what some achrayim wanted to argue. Yeah.
That would be an obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Ashi there in my cut already points out Shvi'as Zman is D'Rabbanan. So the Ran asks the question, he says, how come we don't observe Yovel on a rabbinic level? It's actually the Baal Ma'ar's question, because we'll see later the Baal Ma'ar belonged to the school of Rishonim that held that you don't have to observe Shemitah at all. It's only Midas Chasidus. It's only a pious act, but it's not obligatory. So, and the Baal Ma'ar we'll see later in the Shir we get to. The Baal Ma'ar, I'll prove it to you. Do we conduct Yovel in today's day and age? No. So if we're not, did you ever hear of a rabbinic obligation to observe Yovel? So obviously, if there's no rabbinic obligation to observe Yovel, there's no rabbinic obligation to observe Shemitah, because he says they go hand in hand. He says that they're interlocked. He says Shemitah and Yovel are two mutually exclusive realities. We'll see, if we get there today, we'll see how the Baal Ma'ar relates.
You need 7 Shemitahs to get to Yovel.
To Yovel, okay. But he says, but if we're not observing Yovel on a rabbinic level, then there's no reason to observe Shemitah on a rabbinic level. That was the argument. So the Ran already deals with this argument, number 15 in the reference sheet. Says the Ran, so why did they not make a rabbinic obligation to observe Yovel? Assuming that they would know when Yovel is. Okay? So he says, that would be too difficult for the public to observe. It's hard enough to convince people to abandon their fields for 1 year. If you tell people they have to abandon their fields for 2 years, it's too difficult, they're not going to listen to you. So
if you're going to make that argument, then that's a good argument for having a shore.
That's right. And
that's actually the exact argument you could but
yes,
it's the same argument.
that's right. Heter Mechir is necessary because many farmers would not observe Shemitah if you didn't give them Heter Mechir. And that's one of the reasons why Shlomo Zalman and Mordechai wouldn't favor Heter Mechir, because if you don't employ the Heter Mechira, then you can forget about it. They're not going to... It's a big nisan. It's very difficult. You look at in the Jewish Action, they had a very nice article in the Jewish Action where I think it's the spring edition of the Jewish Action, where they interviewed farmers and they described the challenges of leaving your field free. He says, I have clients that will go to another supplier. It's really very difficult. Farmers that talk about revenue of more than $1 million or $2 million a year that are given up. It's really an amazing thing. So the Ran said it was just too much to ask people to observe Shemitah and Yovel. So therefore the compromise, according to the Ran, was observe Shemitah, but we won't obligate you to observe Yovel on a rabbinic level. Okay.
That's like you could say for any mitzvah that's very hard to observe.
Yeah, but on a deraisa level, if it's deraisa, nobody has the prerogative to say you can't keep the deraisa. But if it's only a rabbinic obligation, so it's a stringency that they apply. So they have the prerogative to say when you keep it, when you don't keep it. And we'll see in today's shir, we'll get to the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Chavav, that will be on the Mar Makam sheet, that it was so difficult to observe Shemitah at a certain point of history because they were heavily taxed. So therefore they said you can plow. They permitted them. They gave them a permit to plow the fields during Shemitah because of the heavy taxing, and it was too difficult for people. So we'll get to that today, hopefully, and that's a very, very important Mar Malcolm, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Chavav, where we see that they gave people the permit to work the fields during the year of Shvius because of the heavy taxing. Okay, now Rashi in Gittin number 17 on the reference sheet. So look at the bold section. Rashi there references the Yerushalmi. I maintain that Rashi didn't learn Yerushalmi. Okay, I have a few proofs. One of my proofs that Rashi didn't learn Yerushalmi, because Rashi writes, Umatzasi b'talmid Rabbeinu Yitzchak Halevi. Yitzchak Halevi was his Rebbe. Rashi had 3 Rebbeim, one of whom was Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi. All students, Rabbi Ben Yakar. Rashi had 3 Rebbeim, all of whom were students of Rabbeinu Gershom. So Rashi says, I found in the writings of the students of Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi, Shekasa, that it's written in the Yerushalmi, that Shemitah and Yovel are mutually inclusive. If there's no Yovel, then there's no Shemitah on a deraisa level. So that's a proof Rashi didn't learn Yerushalmi, because Rashi says, I found in the writings of the students of Rav Yitzchak Halevi that it's written in the Yerushalmi. I don't know if Rashi had access to Yerushalmi. Books weren't available the way they were today. Maybe Rashi couldn't get his hands on Yerushalmi.
No article.
Exactly. No Sefaria, no Eitzra Chachma, right? No HebrewBooks.org.
People had a shas.
Yeah, no, most people, one shas in the town. That's why they had a kina. One of the kinas who read it burned the books. So first of all, Rashi was very honest. Rashi, you can see the intellectual honesty of Rashi. First of all, you find that Rashi is very intellectual. Rashi has no issue saying Le'yadati L'farsha, the beginning of Parshas Tazria. Rashi, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know Le'yadati. Rashi had no qualms about saying I don't know. And you see, Rashi could have said it's written in the Yerushalmi. He could have attributed this find to himself, but he said no. I found in the writings of the students. He wanted to attribute this find to the students of Rabbi. So that's a lot of intellectual honesty. So Rashi quotes the Yerushalmi. Clearly, according to the Yerushalmi, if there's no observance of Yovel, then there's no observance of Shvius. Avol, the Torah is kind of in the Safra. Rashi says, Re'iti I saw, because you said Rashi had the Safra. Probably more than 50% of everything that's written in Rashi is quoted from the Safra, or the Medrash. Okay? So I saw in the Safra, the Shvius naig bizman she'ena Yovel naig, oimer nishum achoy. Because Rashi says, but the Safra doesn't maintain that way, or what he calls the Torah's Kahanim. According to the Torah's Kahanim, even on a deraisa level, you observe Shvius without Yovel. So according to the Yerushalmi, on a deraisa level, no Yovel, no Shemitah. According to the Teres Kahanim, even if there's no Yovel, there's still Shemitah on a deraisa level. Rashi says it's a machlokas. According to Rashi, is Shvius observed today on a deraisa level or not? Machlokas. According to Rashi, according to the Yerushalmi, we observe Shemitah today on a rabbinic level. According to the Teres Kahanim, we observe Shemitah on a deraisa level. That's Rashi's position. I quoted the Safra for you, the Teres Kahanim that Rashi referenced, number 18 in the reference sheet. What does Rashi say? I'll just read the second bold section. The Chacham say Shvius nohages af al pi she'ein Yovel. Why? Because it says V'hay l'cha sheva shapsei shanim. Okay, it says you should have sheva shapsei shanim. There's a bit of redundancy there, so we learn from there that Shvius is nohages af al pi she'ein Yovel. Okay, comes Tosfos in number 19 on the reference sheet. Tosfos in Erech and Daf Lamed Beis. That's the Gemara about Yovel. If you just jump to the bold section, number 19 on the reference sheet, Says Tosfos, Miu Yesh Liyashiv. So first Tosfos presents the opinion that it's a machlokes between the Safra and the Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi accords with Rabbi, and the Safra accords with the Chachamim. So Miu Yesh Liyashiv, Ahuditaris Kanam Afilu Karebi, Vahadatani Shvius Avi Bishani Yovel. I'll tell you, you didn't understand the Safra correctly. What did the Safra mean when it said that there's Shvius even if there's no Yovel? If the nation was sinful and they neglected to fulfill their obligation to observe the Yovel, even so, Shvius is still obligatory. You follow how Tais is explaining it? Exactly.
That they didn't skip Yovel.
Exactly. The Mishnah didn't mean to say that if there's no obligation to observe Yovel, that means there's no obligation to observe Shvius. He meant to say even if the people are neglecting their obligation to observe Yovel at a time where Yovel is obligatory, that doesn't make Shvius permissible.
Yeah. Then the Yovel year was being counted.
The Yovel was being counted. And even when the Yovel was being counted and people were neglecting their obligation to fulfill Yovel, the Safra was saying you still have to observe Shvius. But the Safra agrees that if you're in a period of history where they're not observing the Yovel because the nation is not settled in its land, so then the Safra agrees that there's no observation. In other words, the Safra agrees with the Yerushalmi that if there's no obligation of Yovel, there's no obligation of Shvius either. Okay? So according to Rashi, it's in Beholds between Yerushalmi and the Safra whether we observe Shvius today, Midorais and Darbanan. According to Rashi, according to Tosfos, even according to the Safra today, Shvius is only observed on a rabbinic level. And Tosfos references the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says that Yovel is actually contingent on certain practices. Right? I'll just look at the third paragraph. Let's read all paragraphs. For example, Yovel Afa Bishalei Shamtu, Afa Bishalei Taku, Yochel Afa Bishalei Shalchu, Tamalem Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if people didn't free their slaves, then Yovel doesn't go into effect. According to Rabbi Yossi, right, if you didn't blow the shofar on Yom Kippur of Yovel, you have to blow the shofar. If you didn't blow the shofar, it doesn't go into effect. Amr B'chia Bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, Chachamim Shloishtem Akfaz. According to the Chacham, and this is the Rambam Paskins number 21 in your reference sheet. If they didn't send the slaves free, and they didn't blow the shofar, and also they didn't let the land, they didn't abandon the land. If they didn't do all these three things, Yovel will not go into effect. So you see that Yovel going into effect is contingent. Any one of them, exactly. You need to do three things for Yovel to go into effect.
Those happen at the beginning of Yovel.
The beginning of Yovel, exactly. And if you didn't do all these three things, then Yovel won't go into effect.
Or any one of those three things.
Or any one of those three things, correct. Even one of those three things, Yovel doesn't go into effect. So Taisi says what the Taras Kanim says, by contrast, if you didn't observe Shvius, that will not prevent Yovel from going into effect. Blowing the shofar, sending away the slaves, and leaving the land, that's necessary for Yovel to go into effect. But the observance of Shemitah is not necessary for Yovel to go into effect. That's what the intention of the Safra is, but the Safra agrees that in a period of history when we have no obligation to observe Yovel, neither do we have an obligation to observe Shvius. Is that clear? Okay. Says the Rambam, excuse me. Chazar said the third thing is returning the ancestral plots back to their original owners. That's the third thing that's necessary. So let me correct myself. You need three things for Yovel to go into effect. You need to blow the shofar, you need to free the slaves, and number three, you need to return the ancestral plots to their original owners. Okay? That's the halacha. Okay? So part number 3, right?
That in itself, we couldn't have the Yovel with the rice nowadays
because we don't do these things. Very good. Exactly. In other words, even if we knew when the Yovel year was, aside from the fact that the Jewish people are not fully settled in their land, aside from that, we don't do the necessary actions in order to cause Yovel to go into effect.
Let's assume we did the other two.
We did that too.
We can't do it because we have no way of knowing.
We don't know where everybody's ancestral plot is.
We don't even know what tribes we are.
That's right, exactly. So that would be an additional reason why even if we knew when the Yovel year was, we wouldn't be observing the Jubilee. Okay, so part number 3 on the reference sheet, this is the Sefer Hazakos, it's written by the Ramban, it's written on the Rif. The Ramban was very angry about the fact that some Rishonim maintained that Shvius doesn't have to be observed at all, because if you recall at the beginning of the show, we said there are 3 schools of Rishonim. Some Rishonim hold it's Daraisa, Some Rishonim maintain it's observed only on a rabbinic level, that's the Ikar Halacha. But then there's a school of Rishonim that maintain that it's a midas chasidus, it's a pious act to observe Shvius. So the Ramban was very angry about this third school. Okay, the Bala Ma'ar. The Bala Ma'ar had a habit of getting other Rishonim angry because he was very original. The Ravid was the most angry at the Bala Ma'ar. He insults him and he curses him out at the end of Rosh Hashanah. He says, this is nonsense. He wanted to make a new interpretation with the Tekiyas D'Ma'umad and Tekiyas D'Miyusha. We blow on Rosh Hashanah twice. So he had a reinterpretation. He says, his Chedushim was a failure, and this nonsense is like the rest of the nonsense that he writes. And I told him already that it was... So the asked of Aaron Lichtenstein, when the Rishonim speak harshly about other Rishonim, you have to take them seriously. He says, no, you don't have to take them seriously. Except when the Rabbi talks about the Bala Ma'ar. That's what Aaron Lichtenstein says. So the Sefer Zakos, he was very angry about this opinion, namely the Bala Ma'ar. And this was initially what the Ravid had maintained, that there's no obligation at all to observe Shvius. And what I basically did is he brought a collection of Gemaras where you see that they were observing Shvius even B'Yom Hazeh, even after the Churban, even after the destruction of the Second Temple, they were still observing Shvius. And you can look at a few of the Marmakaimas. I brought some of them. Number 23, I'll try to go through this a little bit quickly. Number 23, the Mishnah in Shvius talks about a rabbinic extension of Shvius, where it means they already had to begin to refrain from working the land. If it's a field of grain, you have to start from Pesach time. If it's an orchard, you have to start from Shavuos time. So the Chachamim want you to stop plowing the fields already for some months before the onset of Shvius. That's right. So the Tosefta says, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, that they were mevatel this. Eventually, Rabbi Gamliel said you can plow and you can work the field up to Rosh Hashanah. That's right, 2 weeks or whatever. I'm saying almost up to the onset of Shvius. Okay, so that's the same thing the Moramite Kadden brings us. Rabbi Shimon Levi, Rabbi Gamliel Beis Din Nimushnei Pragam Elo Bitlom. They were mevatel the stringency of having to refrain from work already a few months before the onset of Shvius. So now what do you see? Rabbi Gamliel lived after the destruction of the Second Temple, and you see that he said you don't have to refrain at the end of the 6th year, but you still need to refrain during the 7th year. That's the first proof that Rabbi Ramban considers a refutation against the Rishonim that hold there's no observance of Shvius B'Yom Hazeh. The second proof is the Gemara in Bava Basra. Rav Yossi told his attendant, please buy lots of fruits and grain in the 6th year because I need to store. I need to have fruits for the 6th, 7th, and 8th year. When did Rav Yossi Bar Chanina live? He lived after the destruction of the Second Temple. So he was already instructing his attendant to stock up. Okay? So you see that they observed Shvius, number 27, on your reference sheet. Another proof, this is a story of Aivu that said he stood in front of Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok, and a certain man, a fascinating story, a man came in front of Rabbi Elazar and said, I'm a very wealthy man. Okay? He was an enormously wealthy man. He said, I own villages, I own orchards, I own olive groves. Also, the people come, and what they do is they hoe the land because they get to pick the fruits. So therefore they want the fruits, the trees, to give a good yield. So they hoe the soil. So he says, but what happens is that it's a problem. He asks if this is a problematic arrangement because they're taking the fruits from the orchards and they're doing work in the fields. So he says, I'm benefiting from it, and it's as if I'm paying their salary with the fruits of Shvius. You're not allowed to use the fruits of Shvius to do merchandise, to do schar, but you're not allowed to use the fruits of Shvius to pay wages. So he says, this kind of arrangement is like paying wages because they're hoeing the fields and they're eating the fruits of the tree. So Rabbi Elazar told him, don't do it. He says, what's the solution? He says, pay them wages, and you also have to be mafkar. So Rabbi Elazar was very impressed with this man. He did a great act of piety. These people were voluntary, out of their own volition, were hoeing the fields. He paid their wages, and he still let them take the fruits for free. So the Gemara asks, how could you hoe in the year of Shvius? So the Gemara says, no, you're not allowed to hoe to improve the land, but you're allowed to hoe the land in order to prevent the trees from dying. He says sometimes there are cracks in the soil, and you have to fill the cracks. If you don't fill the cracks, the trees will die. So you're allowed to engage in any agricultural activity during the year of Shvius if it's preventative, if it's to prevent a great loss. Okay, so that's the whole story, but the bottom line is this story took place after the destruction of the Second Temple, and yet you see the Gemara gives it as a given, the Gemara takes it as an obvious given that they were observing Shvius. Okay, that's another... Yeah?
The ability to do agricultural activities for the great loss, because we Rabbanan?
No, that's because it's preventative. Something that's preventative. Remember, the Doraita, it's very limited. Exactly. There are only 4 malachas that are prohibited on a Doraita level: plowing, sowing, and reaping, and whatever. But anything else, even watering, the maskan of the Gemara and Moed, even watering is not midoraisa. Even watering is an only an issur d'Rabbanan. So anything that's a rabbinic activity, anything which is only an agricultural act, which is only been on a rabbinic level, the Chacham allowed you to do it as long as it's preventative. If it's to avoid a great loss of money. That's right. Or even if it's not Hesed Meruba, the Chacham forbade doing acts which are meant to enhance the quality of the field, but not acts that are just meant to prevent trees from dying or the soil from getting ruined. Okay, the fourth proof is the Gemara in Pesachim. Again, a long story. The Gemara says that Rabbi Bachana witnessed Rav Yochanan ben Elazar eating sfichei shvius, aftergrowths of cabbage. She says, how are you allowed to do that? She says, I heard from Reb Shimon that you're allowed to eat the sfich and the aftergrowths of cabbage. There's a discussion in Rashi. So you didn't hear that from Rabbi Shimon, so you can't eat cabbage. You cannot eat the afterglows of cabbage. I heard from Rabbi Shimon that's permissible, so I have the license to quote the lenient position of Rabbi Shimon. You didn't hear from Rabbi Shimon, so you don't have the license to quote with his lenient opinion. Right, but he was Makabal, I guess it was his Rabbi. Good question. Rashi has a discussion why the afterglows of cabbage is not an issue. Rashi's first explanation that he heard from his Rebbeim was because you don't need to plant them. Which is a chidush. That would mean you're allowed to eat. According to Shimon, you'd be allowed to eat onions. Onions, for example. Onions grow spontaneously. So according to Shimon, you'd be allowed to eat. I suppose I don't know why you have to mention kruv. Why didn't you mention onions? You could have mentioned right. So we don't rule that way. Right? But there are some fruits that you could eat afterglow. For example, pineapple. You can eat, pineapple. I can't remember. There are certain fruits that you don't have to, that you can eat the sfichin. A fruit of a tree you can certainly, there's no issue with sfichin, but there are certain hadamas that you could eat the sfichin because they grow from the branch. The branch dies, but since there's still a stub, since the tree doesn't die entirely, you can eat it, okay? So you see at least 4 proofs, right? That they were still conducting shvius. Number 31, a Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Tes, Amar Rav Huna Berei, Rav Yeshua, Hai Mandul Layada Kamashan Yeshua, I'm in Nitl Chad Shat V'Nachshay. The person doesn't know when shvius is, it's very easy to calculate. He says, we know that the year that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed was the first year in the Shemitah cycle. It was the year after, because they had neglected to observe another Shemitah that they had neglected to observe, and that was the punishment. According to the Torah, the main reason why the destruction came about is because of their neglect of the Shemitah. So the Gemara says, according to that, you can make a simple mathematical equation. Okay, so it's there that the Rashba quotes, Rashi says that since today Shvius is Rabbanon, you still need to observe the Shvius. In other words, even after the destruction, it would be a necessity to calculate. Remember, how are you calculating when the Shvius is? Based on how many years have passed since the destruction of the temple. So we're clearly talking about the reality of B'yayim Hazeh. We're talking about the observance of Shvius B'yayim Hazeh. So it's another proof that the Ramban brings that they still observe the Shvius B'yayim Hazeh. Correct? Because if we're calculating from the destruction of the temple, right? And Rashi points out that you still have to observe it on the rabbinic level. So this is where the Rashba quotes the Ravid, where the Ravid retracted his original position. Originally, the Ravid had maintained that the observance of Shvius is midas chasidus. It's a pious act. Right? But from in this Gemara, the Rashba quotes the Ravid where he retracted his opinion. So this is the main opinion that today Shvius is observed on a rabbinic level. The tour in Shin Lamed Aleph in Yardea, number 34 in your reference sheet, that's the unequivocal affirmative ruling of the tour. That today Shvius needs to be observed on a rabbinic level. The Rambam, there's a bit of a steer in the Divrei Rambam. The Rambam in number 35 in your reference sheet says almost explicitly, look at the last 2 lines of Bizmancha, when the Yovel is not observed, you don't return ancestral homelands, right? You don't free slaves. All of the conducts of Yovel are not chutz, with the exception of Shvius Ba'aretz, except for observing the agricultural Shemitah, Bashmat Iksav, and the cancellation of loans, so the Rambam states almost explicitly that today Shvius observed Rabbanan, and that's the position of the Beis Yosef, that the Rambam maintains this Rabbanan, The Beis Yosef in his debate, we talked about Yevul Nach. Remember, we talked about the Mabed, the war between the Mabed and the Beis Yosef. And in Afkat Roichel, the response of the Beis Yosef, he also writes the Rambam maintained that Shemitah is observed on a rabbinic level. The Kesef Mishnah, the third work of the Beis Yosef, contradicts himself, and he says, no, the Rambam holds this Daraisa. He was Medayik another Rambam, and he took this Rambam out of. He was trying. It's very complicated, Rashiva Zashir, but the Pashtus is according to the Beis Yosef and the Afkas Roichel, unlike what he says in the Kesef Mishnah, most Achrayim maintain that the Rambam held this Drabana. Okay? But there is an interpretation of the Rambam that he held this Daraisa, that's number 38 in the reference sheet. It's the Kesef Mishnah, the way he was Medayik, the Rambam, Al Shmitas Karka, Al Vizmananagis Minatayra. So you see that the Beis Yosef, in two places, in two of his writings, the Beis Yosef and Afkas Roichel, he maintained the Rambam held it was Drabanan, but the Kesef Mishnah number 38 maintained that the Rambam held it was Daraisa. Which Rishon stated that Shmiyas has to be observed today on a Daraisa level? Number 39, the Sefer Itur. The Sefer Itur was from the Balei, he was from the Chachmei Provence. He says, he agrees with the premise that the Gemaras that state that Shvius is Drabanan accorded with Rabbi. He says the Chachamim disagreed with Rabbi. He maintains that the Safra accords with the opinion. We saw the Safra, and according to Rashi's interpretation of the Safra, Shvius today is Daraisa. He understood that the Rabbanan disagreed with Rabbi. He understood the Gemara in Erechin, the Aflamed Beis, where the Chachamim made Shemitah and Yovel interdependent. Right? That means the Gemara Erechin says that they continue to calculate when Yovel was to know when the Shvius is. He understands that that's an indication that Shvius is observed on a Daraisa level. So there's a sheet in the Rishayim that holds that Shvius is observed today on a Daraisa level. But number 5, and this I think is important to learn, these are the sheetas of the Rishayim that hold that Shemitah today is observed only b'midas chasidus. It's an important sheet to know, again, because you could use it as a tziruf. You can use it as a backup shita. If you have other reasons to be lenient, this could be another additional reason to strengthen the grounds to be lenient. Number 41, the Ravid maintained that way, that Shvius is observed today only b'midas chasidus, but the Ravid seemed to have retracted. Now, the Razah, number 42. Okay, it's unfortunate, I might have to steal 5 minutes. The Sefer Trumos, okay? The Sefer Trumos was a Spanish sage from Barcelona. Okay? He was one of the early Rishonim. He lived in the period of the Ramban. He quotes a very long tshuva from the Razah, from Rabbi Zrachiyahu Halevi, the Baal HaMa'ar. The Baal HaMa'ar is the most famous Rishon. It's known to have maintained that Shvius today is only Miras Chasidus, number 42. I couldn't quote the entire tshuva because then I would come with too many papers to the thing. But the main yesod of the Razah, okay, is that Shemitah and Yovel are two sides of one coin. He says it's a multi-functioning system. He says Shvius and Yovel, they function as one, they're like two parts of one unit. Okay, you follow that? There's even a mashmos like that in the Lashon of the Rambam. Right? It's all part of the same system, if you'd like. Okay? So, by the way, Shvius, some understand the time mitzvah, Rabbi Sachs talks about this a lot, that it's in order to reinstate and give the lower classes of society a chance at rebuilding themselves. It gives the lower classes, the poorer classes of society a chance to... That's right. No, but not only that, it says loans are canceled every 7 years. It's a restart. Right? So poor people, it's a social engineering. So say that Shemitah and Yovel are part of the same system of social engineering. After 50 years, all the slaves go back. After 50 years, everybody gets their ancestral home plot. So the Torah understood that loans need to be canceled every 7 years. But the loss of an ancestral plot needs to be canceled every 50 years. Or somebody that's enslaved, that needs to be... It's all part of the same social construct, okay? So that's the way the Sefer Trumah, and he backs it up based on the Gemara in Erechin. The Gemara in Erechin, the Yerushalmi said when you have Shemitah, you have Yovel. And what was the proof that we mentioned already? He says if we're not observing Yovel on a rabbinic level, then we don't either observe Shemitah on a rabbinic level. The reason why he wrote this tshuva to the people they asked the Baal HaMa'ar, he He says, why are people not canceling loans? The Rosh said he had a major issue. He said he came to Spain. He said nobody was canceling loans. He says, what the world's going on over here? He says, don't you guys know that the loans are canceled every 7 years? They weren't even writing a prose bill. He says, I tried to convince them, but it wasn't worth it. They wouldn't listen. So they wrote to the Balamar, and they wrote to the Balamar, do we have to cancel loans or not? He says, no, Shvius today doesn't need to be observed, so don't worry. You guys are not canceling the loans. It's fine. Shvius is not observed. It's part of the same social construct of Yovel. So therefore, if Yovel is not observed, Shvius is not observed. Now, the Ma'ar comes and quotes all these Gemaras. He quotes the Ramban. We just saw 4 or 5 Gemaras that they were observing Shemitah. We saw a whole bunch of Gemaras. He says some of the Gemaras they were observing it Memidas Chasidus. They wanted to be extra pious. He says, he says that is when they were still observing, that is still when they were able to observe the Yovel on a rabbinic level. That's the way I understood. He said in those times they still had the Kiddush HaChodesh, when they used to establish the year and the month according to the Beis Din. That existed even after the destruction of them, almost to the end of the Amoraic period. Hillel, Hanasi, until the age of Rav and Abaye, the very end of the Talmudic period, they were still had a Beis Din, they were Makadosh L'Chodesh. Just when they bring Makadosh L'Chodesh, and they knew when Yovel, so they were observing Yovel on a rabbinic level. So then they observed Shemitah on a rabbinic level. But today, when we're not even observing Yovel on a rabbinic level, you don't need to either observe Shvius on a rabbinic level. You follow that? When Yovel is observed on a Deraisa level, then Shvita is Deraisa. When Yovel is observed on a rabbinic level, Shemitah is Rabban. And today we're not observing Yovel, no Shemitah. That's the way the Balamarsi says all the proofs that the Ramban brought. He says impressive, but it doesn't faze me. The Meiri also rules that way. The Meiri rules that Shvius today is Midrabanan. Midas Chasidus, enough to observe it. And then there's the Shut HaRashbash, at the very, very end of the Rishonim period, the son of the Tashbates. He claims that this is the opinion of the Bahag, Rav Yehuda al-Barceloni, Rav Yehuda ben Yakar, Bala Iter, which is very surprising. We saw that the Bala Iter said that Shvius Mizman is Daraisa. He has a version of the Bala Iter that holds that it's Midas Chasidus. So either the Bala Iter was at one extreme, that he held that it's Midas Chasidus, or the Bala Iter held it's Daraisa. I don't exactly know where he saw in the Hilchos Gedalis, but according to the Rashbash, there is a consensus of Rishonim that hold the Bizman Azeh, Shvius is only observed in Midas Chasidus. Now this is probably the most important part of the Shir. I'll steal 5 minutes so we can finish it al Ragal Achas. Number 47 on your reference sheet. Right? It says the Gemara, Kidamachras Rav Yanai. Number Gemara in Sanhedrin Chavav, Rav Yanai made an announcement, Puku v'zur b'shvius. He said, people, go out and plant in the year of Shvius. Mishum Arnona. What's Arnona? We know what Arnona is. Okay, Arnona was taxes. Today Arnona is the municipality. Okay. Even people that gather crops in the year Shvius are kosher, are certified to testify, and they haven't done an Aveira. So Rashi says, how could he permit it? How could he permit people to plant? Says Rashi, bold section, Shvius Bizman Hazed Rabbanon. So you see, under extenuating circumstances, because the Shvius is only Rabbanon, that's the Ikar Halacha. Right, so therefore the Rekorkus already pashkins that there's really 2 reasons why Shvius is not observed. Rekorkus already points out Rashi's right, but not for the reason that Rashi gave. Not because the Kedushas Haaretz is batal, but because since we're not observing Yovel on a Deraisa level, neither are we observing Shvius on a Deraisa level. But you see the point of Rashi is very significant, it's very important, because Shvius is Drabanan, because of extenuating circumstances, because of the hardship of the farmers, we are allowed to employ extreme leniency. So that's a very important introduction for Heter Mechira. Right? It means to say, is Heter Mechira an ideal heter? Of course it's not an ideal heter, but you already find a precedent in the Talmud that they were employing extreme leniencies because of the hardships. Tosfos brings the same shad. What about the Rishonim that learn that Shvius is Daraisa? How do they explain the Gemara? So Tosfos already says that it could be there was Pikuach Nefesh. Rashi says it wasn't Pikuach Nefesh. Rashi says there was no danger to human life, but they were matter because of the hardships and because Shvius is Darabanan. Tosfos brings an explanation that it was Pikuach Nefesh. The Sefer Iter also says, the Sefer Iter personally maintains that Shvius is Daraisa. He says it was because of Pikuach Nefesh that they were matter. And he actually brings a Yerushalmi that says that explicitly. The Yerushalmi, number 52 on your reference sheet, also brings this Gemara that they allowed people to plow the fields in the year of Shvius. So they asked, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zvidi asked, how could they do it? It was public. So he says that since they're doing it lahachis, there's a halacha that if a non-Jew is publicly forcing you to violate a mitzvah from the Torah, if he's doing it to uproot your religion, then you have to give up your life. So even though this was public, but they were not doing this to uproot the religion, they just wanted the money. So therefore, either way you look at it, you can look at the rest of the Maramekaimis. We've basically gotten to the point. So just the sum of the share. We basically got a quick overview of the three schools of Rishonim. Some Rishonim hold this Daraisa, that's according to the Kesef Mishnah, the opinion of the Rambam and the Sefer Yitur. You have opinions, it's the main halacha, the Rabbi, the way the Rabbi eventually held, retracted, his final opinion, and the opinion of the Ramban, and the Pashtas, the opinion of the Rambam, and the Tur, and the Shulchan Aruch. The Shvius today is the Rabbanan, and therefore they were allowed to apply leniencies in times of hardship, even if it wasn't Pekuach Nefesh. And there is an opinion that the whole thing is Mimiras Chasidus, that's the opinion of the Baal HaMa'or, the Meiri, and according to the Rashbash, there is a consensus in the Rishonim for that Shita. And again, it's used as a tziruf, so this is an important introduction. When we go into the next week, we'll get to the actual inyanim of Heter Mechira, how they exactly executed the Heter Mechira, and that also has to be done with the general appreciation that we have really no choice, and that we have to employ the Heter Mechira because of the hardships of the farmers, as we found in the Gemara in Sanhedrin Chafal. Okay? Thank you very much.